Yeah, I'll set you first. Okay. Well, guys, finally we are ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome you to our weekly student forum. As you know, the forum is designed to exchange ideas, receive feedback from students and faculty members alike. Today, our presenter is Al-Hadar Mumuni, and he is one of our PhD students. The title of his presentation is Sociolinguistic and Cultural Challenges of Ghanaian Migrant Workers in Qatar's Education City. Now, we'll take the questions and comments at the end of the session. And I'm sure that it will be a very interesting presentation. Hadar?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm sorry I kept everyone waiting. It wasn't my intention. We had to pray.
You're trying really hard, huh?
Yeah. Okay. So the title, Too Much Mushkila, Sociolinguistic and Cultural Challenges of Ghanaian Migrant Workers in Qatar's Education City. A few things I'm going to talk to you about today. The background of this study. We'll talk about the theoretical framing. We'll talk about the methods that I used to collect data. We'll go ahead and talk about the findings that came out of the data or the research, and then the conclusion and implication of this research. So, the background. One thing that is very, very known today is that the outpouring of low-skilled migrant workers to Qatar and the developed countries has raised significant attention, media and academic attention in recent years. And the reason being that there's a rise in migration trend, right? So what does this mean? With the instability that is going on in the world today, if you go to Africa and Ethiopia, there is so many crises in the Middle East, in Palestine, in some other places. There are so many issues, so people have to migrate, move from their countries to other countries to make ends meet, right? And then majority of the people that migrate to these developed countries are low-skilled migrant workers. I'm not saying that highly skilled migrant workers do not travel to work in other countries, but majority of the people that travel, especially to the Middle East, are low-skilled migrant workers, right? Now, for some of them who are not even low-skilled migrant workers, they travel and end up becoming low-skilled migrant workers because the skills that they have is not necessarily needed where they find themselves. Some of the people that I interviewed told me that they are trained teachers, they are trained nurses, but they come here and they have to be cleaners or chefs or just something around the low-skilled, right? Their skill is not very much needed, so they have to end up being low-skilled migrant workers, right? Now, the focus in recent literature has been on the well-being of these migrant workers, right? They look at the psychological well-being of the migrant workers. They look at the social, physical well-being of these migrant workers. Other researchers also look at the working conditions that these migrant workers are faced with when they come to Qatar. What is the condition that they are met with? That is what other literature or other scholars are looking at. Now, while all these things are very important and relevant in helping us understand the migration life or the things that these migrant workers go through, it is limited because it ignores migration as a sociocultural practice, right? So what we are going to do in this, or what we did for this research, is that we intended to contribute to theory and practice knowledge on low-skilled migrant workers by examining the sociolinguistic and cultural challenges that are implicated in the lives of these migrant workers, right? So what has been ignored is one thing that we want to look at. Now, in recent years, many scholars have tended to look at practice theory in their research approach, right? One of such theories that have gained popularity is Bourdieu's theory of practice, all right? Now, the reason I adopted Bourdieu's theory of practice for this study is because it provides a holistic understanding of human behavior within social context. It doesn't take one part and ignore the other. It looks at the whole thing which is why I thought it was relevant for this study, right? Now, the other thing that Bourdieu says is that his approach looks at agents and their social environment. He argues that there is this reciprocal relationship that exists between agents and their social environment, in that it captures the full spectrum of social reality, right? Now, what are the components of Bourdieu's theory of practice? He mentions three things, basically: habitus, field, and capital, right? I'll start with the first one, habitus. Now, habitus is the structure that shapes our ability to think and behave in a certain way. All of us seated here have our habituses, right? You coming from Ethiopia, Albania, Lebanon, all of us come with different habituses. It's more like habits, but not necessarily what that is. It goes beyond that. So habitus is that thing that is within you that makes you who you are and shapes your way of thinking, your upbringing. Your habitus is shaped by your upbringing and where you come from, right? So the other thing is that whilst we have our different habituses, we find ourselves within a field so that we'll operate with the habituses we have. So Bourdieu defines field as the social space where actors struggle over resources, stakes, and access to maintain or enhance their position for legitimacy and power. Now, what this means in simple terms is that, given that we all seated here have different habituses, we could consider this place as a field, this room as a field where researchers come and argue their research or explain their research and hear from fellow researchers to better their paper or contributions and so on and so forth. So Education City could be considered as a field. The whole of Qatar could be considered as a field where everyone comes to express their habitus, right? Now, Bourdieu also says that if you come with your habitus within a field, there is one thing that you need to function or gain power, which is what he calls capital. Right? Now, what is capital? Capital refers to the acquired resources, either embodied or objectified, that individuals or entities possess, such as representation, titles, and so on and so forth. Now, to stand out here, to speak, one must probably possess a certain form of capital. It could be great public speaking abilities, which is a capital. You could need a good speaking ability, which is like linguistic capital or presentation capital. So for the migrant workers to function very well within Education City, they have to possess a certain form of capital, right? So that is what we are going to very much look at. So moving on. Given that I want to understand the sociolinguistic and cultural challenges of Ghanaian migrant workers using Bourdieu's theory of practice, the best methodology that I thought was needed for this study is qualitative research methodology. Now, before I move on to explain the data collection method, let's discuss why Qatar was very, very necessary for this research, right? First thing, when Qatar, and this is very obvious, right? When Qatar won the bid to host the World Cup, so many people started trooping in. There was demand for people to come and work within the stadiums, within most of the industries that they have, right? So again, the world started paying attention to Qatar. And then when Qatar discovered oil in the 1960s, thereabout, there was an economic boom, right? So many people started coming in, started coming to work. Majority of these people, low-skilled migrant workers. So again, attention on migration. And then when there is economic boom, automatically the citizens become well off. So there was growth in income amongst the locals. They needed domestic workers. They needed people to come and work in their homes. So again, Qatar was very relevant for this study. Now, the data collection method was through interviews and non-participant observation. Now, I don't explicitly call it an ethnography because I didn't immerse myself fully in the lives of these individuals, but I stood afar and watched their activities. Of course, post IRB approval, because if I don't mention IRB, I could be in trouble right now. So we observed their behaviors, not just taking data from interview, but it went beyond that. I did a non-participant observation of these migrant workers. And the reason I was able to do that was because I was within Education City. I used to live here. I was in the Bill student house. And so it was easy for me to get access to these migrant workers that I was looking at for the study. Right? The sampling techniques, I had to go with convenient and purposive sampling, given that I'm looking at specific group of individuals, Ghanaian migrant workers. So you have to fit this category to be considered for this study. The data analysis method, which most scholars use when it comes to qualitative research, is Brown and Clark's data analysis. So, you codify this data, you put them together and so on and so forth. He has this approach that you can adopt when you're doing your research. Moving forward, what came out of the study? Few things, 3 challenges we found: social, linguistic, and economic challenges. I'll start with the first one. The one thing that these guys felt was a problem, given that we are looking at the sociolinguistic again, social living of these people, was the dietary practices. And I want to go back to the cultural essence of this study. In Ghana, we have variety, and I'm saying we because I'm also a Ghanaian, so it was easy to understand their grievances and so on and so forth. We have variety of diets or variety of food, right? So you don't get people eating one food every day. You could go a month without repeating food. However, these migrant workers would tell me that they eat rice every day, and this had an impact on their psychological. So it was a problem for them, basically, right? The other, and this is some of the excerpts. I took screenshots of them, some of the things they said. We eat rice every day, and this affects them when they are going back to the accommodations. They feel that they would go insane, and so on and so forth, right? And then there is the issue of homogenizing heterogeneity. Now, what I mean by this is that, you see, often people forget that Africa is a continent that has so many countries, and we are not all the same. We could all be black. No, well, not all of us are black, but we are not all the same. However, people forget that. So there was an issue, so many issues, especially when these guys approach their bosses to tell them that, I mean, we can't all be eating rice. The bosses would tell them, they call them camp bosses. They will tell them that, well, the Kenyan is eating it, so just shut up and eat it. And then they forget that Kenya is close, or Ethiopia is close. It lives somewhat as, the Arab world. They're okay with some of the food, but they ignore that and homogenize the entire African continent. So that was a problem. And then the final thing is open discrimination. The whole thing is, this was a problem, actually. In most of my conversation with them, I nearly shed tears when it came to how they are treated in terms of discrimination, right? Now, I told you that in the beginning, that in Bourdieu's components of his practice theory, one thing that stands out is capital. Capital is very essential. I don't know why I'm sweating so much. Okay, yeah. One component is capital, right? So these guys do not necessarily stay and cry. They have to find a way to gain capital. And what do they do to address these social issues? They form kinship networks. Often we believe that kinship is when you are biologically related to somebody. But there are so many scholars that dispute that. One of such example is Janet Carson. She's written a great deal on kinship and addressed the whole issue of kinship coming from biological relations. It goes beyond that. So what these guys do is that they form kinship ties. And how do we legitimize these kinship ties that they form? Emotional availability. When this person goes back home, they sit with their kin. The brothers and sisters that they have formed here, they sit with them, chat with them all the time, try to address their grievances and not necessarily dwell on the harsh conditions that they find themselves in. When I say harsh conditions, I don't mean like it's super harsh that they want to kill themselves. I mean, QF is great. And then symbolic rituals, right? Janet Carson says that for some people to acknowledge somebody or other people as their kings, there are some symbolic rituals that they often engage in. An example is taking walks every night. These guys came from different parts of the country. Some of them are not even necessarily Ghanaians, like the African brothers and sisters that they make. They take walks every day to gain some certain form of capital to be able to, function here properly. And some even go to the extent of braiding each other's hair for free. And this is all some of the things they do to kind of, solidify their kinship relationships, right? The next thing is struggle with Englishes. And this happened to me when I first arrived in Qatar. I sat in an Uber and, come here, we go, me, Qatar, me. I didn't understand anything. And this guy felt he was speaking English to me. So this is exactly what they face in Education City, right? In Ghana, we have appropriated the English language to, the youth. However, it's so different here. It was a problem for them. So many linguistic hurdles. Communication is very important when people are working within migratory fields, right? But if you are put together with someone who cannot put 3 or 4 sentences together to make you understand some things, it becomes problematic. So it affects them in most of the works they do. So again, it affects the teamwork, like they said here. Now, how did they acquire capital, right? These guys tell me that they have developed a non-verbal communication strategy, right? So many non-verbal communication strategies to address some of these things. One of them tells me that sometimes if he wants the other guy to see what he mean, he just points at it or do some stuff. And it's better way of them understanding each other than necessarily speaking good grammar with them. They would never understand. And that was one of the problems they were facing. Pidginization, like I said earlier on, this is very common in most parts of the world. Pidgin English. Countries have appropriated the English language to suit them or suit their citizens. However, it's so different here. So some of them tell me that they have to try to adopt to this Pidgin style of speaking. And all of us have tried, maybe not all of us, but majority of us here even speak that English when we meet these guys. And by these guys, I mean majority of those coming from the Asian part of the world. They understand each other with that level of English. The other thing that they do is that they adjust their habituses. Like I said, we all come here with different habituses. However, when you find out that the condition within the field is quite different, sometimes people have to adjust their habitus to be able to, succeed within that field. And then economic challenges. This is very, it's a given. Some of them complain about low salaries, constant pressure from home, increased expenditure within the field. So what they do is, and again, I want to capitalize on this particular part, the construction of the financial social system as a form of capital. I don't think this is very common in this part of the world, right? But they said that they had to bring that cultural attributes that they have back home, which is that a group of people who trust each other will put their monies together. And then at a point, one person would pick it, and then the next month, the other person will pick it. It's in a rotational form. So that's how they succeeded. Now, let's conclude. 3 things from this study. The first one, contributing to migration knowledge in exploring the sociolinguistic and cultural challenges of low-skilled migrants workers, something that was lacking in the literature, not very well, very inadequate. And then we looked at framing sociolinguistic within Bourdieusian framework. And then the final thing that came out of the study was that we tried to raise awareness to QF to address some of these issues that were very obvious and then that the employees were going through, right? Now, some of the implications or suggested policies that we gave QF was that they should implement an intensive language training program for these guys. So the proposal or suggestion was that when migrants from different parts of the world come, at least there should be a certain form of language training program that would help them to adjust very well in the working environment, Given that, again, English language is the lingua franca here, I think it's very important that at least to give them some form of English language training before they operate in the field. Another thing is that we said that QF must amend policies regarding the dietary practices. This was a very, very significant aspect of the study, where almost every participant, and I forgot to mention the 9 participants I was able to investigate or interview because of the limited time that I had to complete this research. So almost all 9 of them complained that the food was an issue. So we suggested or proposed to QF that they amend policies regarding the dietary practices, and then finally instituting a strong and impartial framework to address the issue of discrimination. Because again, like I said, during the interview, when I got to this part that speaks so much about discrimination, I nearly teared off. It was very, very emotional, and it was a difficult thing to hear in terms of discrimination, right? So that is that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Al-Hadar, for this interesting and thorny presentation at the same time. I'm sure that we have questions, perhaps comments for Al-Hadar.
Yeah, Hadar, what is your hypothesis? I couldn't understand it, to be honest. What exactly is your hypothesis?
Okay. So you elaborate on what you mean by hypothesis, and then
like there was a problem in the topic you mentioned about Ghanaians and how they are in a worker situation. But what is your solution to that? You suggested it, but that is a problem statement. How do you hypothesize it in the research paper itself?
if you're talking about solutions, these were some of the suggested policy implications that we gave QF. If they have to solve these issues, then these are some of the important aspects that they need to look at, right? So if that is what you mean by hypothesis, then yeah.
This suggestion is not hypothesis.
Okay.
Hypothesis comes right after, it's like an answer to your question, that question you raise within the research. I mean, I don't know, I'm still learning,
Okay.
but we are taught these basic components.
Okay.
You have to follow through.
That's why I asked you what you mean by hypothesis. Usually, if I am wrong, you correct me, please. So in quantitative study, that's when you probably have a hypothesis and you're trying to prove it, right? So in a qualitative study, what we looked at was we realized there was a problem. And we saw that from the literature, that majority of the literature looks at well-being, psychological well-being. They look at the living conditions, but then they ignore the sociocultural aspect. And that is what we saw, the gap, the loophole, and we tried to resolve it. So, I mean, in a purely quantitative study, I can mention or I can state the hypothesis for you. Yeah, but this is a qualitative study. Yeah. Yes, please.
So, yeah, thanks very much for your presentation. I should say you presented very confidently, by the way. It's a very good presentation style. Regarding this question, though, to do with the hypotheses, I don't think you want to respond by saying that's something restricted to quantitative work. So you can still test a hypothesis through qualitative methods. And I think just constructively, maybe what's going on here is this is a very sympathetic investigation you've conducted. I mean, probably, I don't know, but probably these workers you spoke to were, it might have been the first time that somebody had actually asked them how they felt about their experience.
Yeah.
So, so I'm sure they were grateful to even to be able to vent a bit or get something off their chest. So that's all very well taken, and you know, being able to suggest policy implementations to QF is also great. But what might engage your audience or your readers and so forth, and might change your thinking a bit about it too, is just to try to ask yourself, what's the puzzle here? This is maybe another way of saying like what's the hypothesis, but it's like whatever was the content of these interviews and whatever these workers told you was an answer to some question. So sometimes you hear the answer first and then you say, what question do these data answer, right? But it's another way of saying it is that there's some theory of the world, some opinion you might have over what the situation is, that these data contradict or invalidate. So actually, when you have a hypothesis, your objective should not be to prove the hypothesis, actually should be to disprove it. So in science, you cannot accept a hypothesis, you can only fail to reject it. So if there was any sense I had of something missing from the presentation, it was only the sense of what's the puzzle? Like, is there a tension that you can put your finger on? I'd also say it's kind of feels like it's sensitive topic.
Yes, actually, yeah.
So maybe the puzzle is not something so easy to enunciate, but just guessing. If I had to guess, it's like you're saying these things sound like a very sensible policy recommendations. Sounds very sensible. Everyone in here, no one's going to disagree with you that this ought to happen, but it didn't happen, right? Or I mean, like it didn't happen until you pointed it out. Why not? Where was the mechanism by which this discontent could have been voiced, could have been addressed? That was missing. You stepped in and conducted a study and then passed on some recommendations. But if you hadn't, if you'd picked a different topic, it would never have come up. And therein lies but it's sensitive. I can see it's a sensitive.
Yeah, I could go on and on and explain.
Very briefly, because we'll open the.
Okay, the sensitive nature. In fact, even when we're trying to apply IRB for this, there were so many places we could not go. There were so many things we could not touch. So again, that in itself affected the magnitude of what we wanted to do when it came to this. So yes, I would leave it to that. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. So maybe I just wanted to understand which level you are in or which stage you are in through your PhD journey, because I'm a random audience. I just wanted to catch you what stage you were, because it's quite brief and intense though. Intense, you presented it very confidently. I agree with him. So thank you very much for that. Just I wanted to know, what are you passing through? I mean, what stage
This is
you
my
are?
first year actually.
Sorry?
First year.
First year. Okay, that's fine.
Yes, semester.
First semester, yeah.
6 weeks.
But he did his master's at HBKU at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences.
I think I saw him because I did my master's here from Women's Society and Development. So yeah, so there are some questions along with it, like it could be a comment. So very first picture could be, since you say it's Ghanaian, I mean specifically focused to the Ghanaian people. So the first picture could represent Ghanaian labor. It's better to
Oh, I get what you mean. The first picture I presented.
yeah.
They're from Saudi.
Yeah.
I see they are from the Asian, like South Asian, or better.
Yeah, so I should present a Ghanaian. Okay.
More, okay.
Okay.
So I have one more question. It's like, since you belong to Ghana, that's why you are representing Ghanaian, or any other? Why it is Ghanaian? Since you are living in QF, that's why you are researching for the. I mean, your focus, your field study just concentrated in QF, just because you are living in. What is the perspective that you choose your field? It is QF. Why you choose only Ghana?
Accessibility. It was easy to access migrant workers here. And given that I did it during the period of my master's, I didn't have so much time to even go beyond QF. I could, but this would be easily accessible, migrant workers within QF.
Yeah, that could be for your easy access to that.
Yes.
So you better mention it could be more better. If you
I should mention it.
Yeah.
No, I have it in the paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is the last one? Okay. I'm finished. What is the percentage of this Ghanaian labor among other labors? Is why cheap labor is heavier here in Qatar?
Why I chose
What is the percentage of Ghanaian people, Ghanaian labor?
Oh. In comparison to the others, so it was less than 10%, because I have the figures in the paper. I should have brought them in the presentation. So we have at most 129 African migrant workers, and the Ghanaians were around, and I'm talking about only African migrant workers, but on the broader scope, there are almost 1,200 or so from all nationalities, right? So the Ghanaian migrants, again, even within the African context, the Kenyans are more, the Ugandans are more, the Ghanaians were around 40 something, getting to 50, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Abdullah and then Fatim.
Yeah, thank you very much, Al-Hadar, for this very, I would consider very relevant and timely. And I would also say maybe a little bit under-researched aspect, because I think when it comes to research and migrant workers, I'm not sure there's a lot of spotlights, particularly in the African migrant workers. So I think this is very, very relevant for me. And I think this is actually very well done research. I think the objective of the research is very clear. You trying to examine from a sociocultural rather than physical abuse perspective that most researchers focus on. So I think this is very clear in my opinion. However, what I was actually very interested in is two things you mentioned. And it's more of a question about what you experienced during the process of data collection. Number one, you mentioned that a lot of and this is something I also know particularly personally, that a lot of migrant workers or people who come to work from the African continent, a lot of them actually have very advanced or at least university level degrees. But when they come here or they go to other parts of the world, then they have to settle for less because, well, although we actually have some of the most brilliant minds over there, the educational qualifications are not regarded at equal level as, let's say, someone from other parts of the world. So how did they, the Ghanaian migrants you spoke to, how did they deal with that level of condescending treatment, number one? And secondly, the other question is, with regards to the cultural aspects. So I know you mentioned that a lot of the migrant workers tended to bond with each other. They made this contribution. This was actually talked about in Nigeria, also we call it Ajo. It's kind of a monthly contribution where you rotate it. But how did they have the opportunity to interact also with other non-low skilled, or let's say high skilled workers within the area to form a support network? Was that present, or did they only just focus on low skilled migrants within the community? Because I think that might actually help them to actually cope more. But I don't know if that was present or if you got that perspective between the interviews or.
That's such a brilliant question. I'll start with the second one because I don't want to forget that part. So did they connect with other highly skilled people? I mean, I would say that seeing me there, coming to them and trying to listen to them was probably the first time that they had somebody out of their circle to engage with them. That is why they received the whole thing with pure heart. They came on time for the interviews. They were okay with me looking at them, watching their activities and so on and so forth. And sometimes they would even send me screenshots of all the challenges that they face. And I didn't mention this, but part of the study is what I submitted for the conference, their online activities on WhatsApp and so on. So yes, they do not really approach others. And again, it could be because of their habitus, right? Coming from Ghana, they thought, well, you should always be within your social class, right? And these are my class. These are the people that fall within my class. So it was not easy for them to approach. Although the truth is, the people in a different class here in Qatar are very nice, right? Like people who are really well-to-do are very, very nice. However, they were scared to like approach them. I asked them these questions. They were scared to approach them. And that is why they were so happy seeing me over there. Although I was just a student, right? I was just a student, but they will see me all the time and just be hello, hi. And the first one, that high skilled, and then they come here, they become low skilled, right? How do they take it? That's your question. It was very difficult for them, especially the guy who said he's a trained teacher. He has a degree in teaching, right? In education. Yet he has to clean the toilet every day, excuse my language, right? He felt it was quite demeaning, but he had a goal. He had a purpose. He wanted to feed the family, and majority of them are married. On 1,200 riyal salary, right? So it wasn't that he had a choice, right? If the skill is not needed, you have to deal with it. And even today, I get that. Today, at work, I was going to the immigration's office. The guy who was driving me was telling me he studied, he has a degree in medicine from Sudan. Yet he's driving me to the immigrations. And that's a problem. Skills mismatch is not just happening here in Qatar, it's all over, you know. So it's pathetic, it's painful, but it's something we all have to deal with. Yeah.
Perhaps one last question.
Thank you, Al-Hadar. So one of the suggestions you mentioned that QF should amend their policies. Just so throughout your research, is it the QF policies issue, or because some of the migrants, like in order to, let's say, to escape any clashes, they hire third parties, so they bring them. So in a sense, like the policies of the tenders when they start hiring, because of course the QF policies for employees and everyone working here, they might be different from the others. So that's my question. Like, is it they're mostly third parties employees, like companies?
That's such a great, in fact, all the questions have been amazing. And thank you guys so much for them. Great questions. Thank you for that brilliant question. So yes, we said QF because whilst these guys have their separate policies, right? QF still has to look at it to allow them to operate within their field. And I use field because I want to stay within Bourdieu's language or lingo, right? So I use QF because, again, we could go back, QF could talk to them that, hey, there's policies that you are implementing. If anything, although it doesn't directly affect QF, it is still within QF. And it's easy to approach QF, given that I was students. It's easy to approach QF to tell them that these are the things we found out, and then they can talk to the people. They were very cooperative, even the guys that contract them, the employees to Education City, they were very cooperative when it came to even giving us these guys to come for the interviews. In fact, we took consent from them as well, right? But we thought going directly to QF would help resolve the issue on a broader scale. Then they would be able to look at other contractors within QF who are probably also, you know, causing some issues to the employees, and they would be able to address it. So the goal, while wasn't necessarily to do it on a micro scale. We want to have a macro reform, right? Where all subcontractors are taken care of all at once. Yeah.
All right. I'm afraid that we have to conclude this session. Thank you so much, Al-Hadar, for this presentation. We'd also like to thank the audience for grilling him and we got questions. And I really look forward to seeing you next week, inshallah. We have another session. We have weekly session, as you know. So hopefully I will see you next week, inshallah. Thank you so much and have a great day.